Hey guys, so I wanted to make an instructional video for you guys for algebra 1. So if some of you need some help with specific things like, well, first off, the units on quadratics, right? It's unit 11. Okay. For 11.1, they wanted you to do I think just basic factorization. So factoring and then solving. Factoring, then solve. Then for 11.2, they wanted you to use complete the square. 11.3 quadratic formula. And then 11.4 they wanted you to use they wanted you to start graphing. Okay, so I want to do like at least like one or two examples from each one. That way you guys can kind of get a better picture of what's going on. And then hopefully this helps on top of the other resources I'll be posting for you. So let's do two examples for factoring and then solving. So let's do one of the checkup questions for 11.1. So for let's do number 1. Or checkup 1 if you haven't done so. So you have 36x squared plus 12x equals 0. Well, if you look at this, if you remember something we've done before in class, hopefully you do, they share an x in each term, and the greatest common factor between both is 12. So, GCF 12x. We're going to pull that out, factor it out. Remember, it's like dividing. 36x squared divided by 12x. Well, that's just 3x. 12x divided by 12x, what's left? 1 equals 0. So now we have two factors, 12x and 3x plus 1. Now we can separate these. 12x equals 0. 3x plus 1 equals 0. And then we just solve for x. Here, x equals 0. Subtract 1, subtract 1. 3x equals negative 1. So x equals negative 1/3 divided by 3. Here, let's go back to this one. What did we do to get 0? Well, we just divided by 12. 0 divided by 12 is just 0. So here we have x equals 0 and x equals negative 1/3. So to factor this two-term binomial, right, we use GCF. Factored out the greatest common factor, which was just 12x. Okay, and then we just separate into two equations using the zero product property, and then we did one-step equations. So let's do another one. So you have, let's do number 4. You have x squared plus 12x plus 32 equals 0. Okay, so how would I factor this? You have three terms, it's a quadratic. So, if you remember from class, we're going to do basic factoring. So what do I mean by this? We're going to find what multiplies to 32, what adds to 12. Okay, can you think of any numbers? 32. Well, I know 4 times 4 plus 10 plus 2 is 12, but 10 times 2 is 20, so that doesn't work. I know, hold on, let's do 10 times 2 is 20, but 10 plus 2 is 12. That doesn't work. How about 8 and 4? Well, I know 8 times 4 is 12. I'm sorry, 32. And I know 8 plus 4 is 12. So that has to be my two factors. So then I have two binomials. X and x will give me x squared. A positive 8 and a positive 4. And this will give me, of course, this equals 0. So I just basically went from standard form to factored form. And now I can split it into two equations, linear equations. X plus 8 equals 0, x plus 4 equals 0. So now I want to solve for x. Well, now all I have to do here is one-step equation. Subtract 8, subtract 4, and subtract 4. And then x equals negative 8, x equals negative 4. Okay, so hopefully that helps for the checkup one if you haven't done so yet. So let's go to completing the square. Okay, so for number one, you have, oh, this is completing the square. Okay, you have x minus 3 squared equals 5. Well, what can I do to this binomial squared? Binomial has two terms. That will make my square go away. Well, if you remember from class, the inverse operation for something squared is square root. Okay? That'll make the 2 and the square root, the exponent of 2 cancel with the square root. And you have x minus 3 equals square root of 5. Okay? Plus or minus 5 because it's squared. So, now, this x minus 3 is either going to equal to square root of 5, or it's going to be x minus 3 equal to negative square root of 5. Why? Because one is positive and one is negative. So now I have two separate equations. We're going to add 3 here, add 3 here. So x equals 3 plus square root of 5, and x equals 3 minus square root of 5. Okay, so those would be your two solutions. This one was already squared, so all you had to do was just square root. Okay, but there's another way you can write it too if you wanted. Okay, we could just literally just add a 3 here for this step. And this would be the same as x equals 3 plus or minus square root of 5. These two things mean the same thing. I just split in the bottom here into two separate equations, but the same thing on top. Okay? Now, let's do number 3. You have 3x squared minus 6x equals 21. So they want us to complete the square here. So they want us to use the formula b divided by 2 and then square it. Okay? And that's going to give us our third term. So here, first what you have to look at is a simplified. So I'm looking at 3, 6x, and I notice that there's a common factor here, 3. So I'm going to divide everything by 3 to make it look simpler. 3 divided by 3 is x squared. Negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. And then I have 7 here. Okay, so this looks a lot easier to work with than 3x squared minus 6x equals 21. So now I'm going to complete the square here. What's b here? Well, it's always going to be the term next to the x. Not x squared, x. So b here is negative 2. So we're going to have negative 2 divide it by 2, and then square it. Okay, so now we have negative 1 squared. Negative 1 times negative 1 is just 1. Okay, so now we're going to add this here. And then whatever we do to one side, we got to do to the other. So now I have x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 8. Because 7 plus 1 is 8. So now we have now we have a trinomial and 8. Okay, so now, just like how we did a second ago, now I'm going to factor this. Okay, and it wants us to leave it like as a factor squared equals a value. So this is going to be the same as 1 multiplies to 1 and adds to negative 2. Well, I know negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. And negative 1 plus negative 1 is negative 2. So these have to be my two factors. X minus 1, x minus 1 equals 8. And we know this is the same as x minus 1 squared equals 8. And that's pretty much what they wanted you to do for the checkup. So these two mean the same thing, and we could leave it like this. So you have to ask yourself, can I simplify this or not? Okay, the greatest common factor here was 3, so I divided by 3. And then I did complete the square to solve for the factor, but they wanted me to leave it like this. Okay, if you wanted to solve more, you would do what you did here for the first step. And you would have these two solutions. Okay, so let's do a quadratic formula one for section 11.3. For those of you who haven't done so. So quadratic formula, I'm only going to show one because it's going to take forever. Okay. Let's see. Quadratic formula. Well, we know the formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So you have to tell yourself what's a, what's b, and what's c in my quadratic equation. So let's do, I want to do number 1. So let's do, we have 2x squared plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. Okay, so now what's a, what's b, and what's c? So I know a has to be the number in front of x squared, so that's 2. B is 4, and c is negative 6. So now we're going to plug those in to what our formula says. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus square root of 4 squared minus 4. A is 2, and then 6 is negative 6. I mean, c is negative 6. Everything is over 2 times 2. So now I have, so now we have here, we put everything in. Now we got to do order of operations. So now I have negative 4 plus or minus order of operations. 4 squared is 16. Okay. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 6. That's going to give you positive 48. Everything divided by 4. So now, okay, now we have x equals negative 4 plus or minus square root of, well, what's 48 plus 16? 64. That's all over 4. Now, let me just take this to the next page. We had x equals negative 4 plus or minus square root of 64 all over 4. Well, I know that the square root of 64 is 8. So now we have x equals negative 4 plus or minus 8 all over 4. Okay? Now, this is what you would do if you wanted to do numbers 1 through 6 for your checkup, for those kids who haven't done so, right, for 11.3. Okay, this would be the solution for 1 to 6. Now, for 7 through 10, 7 through 10, they want you to simplify further. So, once this happens, now you have two equations. You have x equals, and we've done this in class before, so x equals -4 plus 8 divided by 4, and x equals -4 minus 8 and divided by 4. Well, -4 plus 8 should be +4 over 4, and we know that 4 divided by 4 just gives us 1. Here we have x equals -4 minus 8. Well, that's just going to make it more negative, so that's going to be -12 divided by 4. So now I have x equals -3. So now I have my two solutions. X equals 1 and x equals -3 for quadratic formula. Okay? So, for that would be for 11.3 to 11.4. And the last thing was graphing. Okay? So, just want to show you the things that you will need to consider. So let's say you have x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0. Let's say you wanted to graph that, right? So you have a graph. Okay. Okay. There's two things you can use. There's some things you can see here. Well, my y-intercept. Okay. Y-intercept, set x equal to 0. If you put 0 for everything here, you're just going to get a solution of 1. So y equals 1 when you plug it in. So then your y-intercept is 0, 1. So I know I'm going to have a point right here at 0, 1. Okay? Now, another way is to find x-intercepts to help us graph x-intercepts. X squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0. I can factor that, just like from 11.1. Two numbers that multiply to 1 add to 2. Well, that's just x plus 1 and x plus 1. Okay. And that's just going to be x plus 1 equals 0. So therefore, x equals -1. So that means at -1, 0, I'm going to have a point there as well. -1, 0. Okay. Now, how would we find axes of symmetry? We're going to use the formula. Which is going to be -b over 2a. So, let me make some space here. Let me move this over here. Okay. Okay, so now I have, let me put this line over here. So, okay, so now we have x equals -b over 2a. That's going to be our axis of symmetry. Okay, AOS for short. Okay, b is 2, so we have -2 over a is 1, so 2 times 1. So x equals -2 over 2. X equals -1. So this axis of symmetry, if you remember, is a straight line, vertical linear equation that divides a parabola in half. Okay, so if I know that I have a point here at the x-intercept, a point here, and my parabola is going to be symmetric, okay, then my other point has to have to be at negative 2, 1. Negative 2, 1. Because my parabola is symmetric. Okay? Well, I mean, obviously my image is not perfect, but I mean, you can kind of see that based off the image, okay? So that's if my quadratic was in standard form. I can use the y-intercept, x-intercepts, and then I can use my axis of symmetry to help me find another point that's symmetric to a point you already have on the graph. Okay, so let me just write this down over here. You can find y-intercept, second, find x-intercepts, okay. Third, find axis of symmetry, and then find other points. Okay, that would help you find your solutions. Also, something I forgot to mention, so let me go back. Here, this is the smallest point, so therefore this should be your minimum, and then should be your vertex. Okay, vertex is always the highest or the smallest point on your parabola, so that's something I forgot to mention. So hopefully this stuff helps for stuff you haven't done or stuff you're going to do. I'm gonna post future videos, shorter videos for you for the upcoming sections. That way you can it'll help you either do the quizzes, help you understand better.